Hi, my name is Dr. Sharla Horton-Williams, and I want to talk to you tonight about storytelling. Everyone has a story. Everything is a story. Life is really just a series of stories, some good, some bad, some funny, some sad. And while data matters and research matters and statistics matter and metrics matter, it's stories that move people. Stories motivate, stories inspire, stories sell, stories compel, stories connect. Stories connect people to people. They connect people to causes. They connect people to organizations, people to ideas. That said, no matter what your role is, or what organization you're a part of, or what your job is, or what your goal is in life, storytelling is one of the most significant skills that you can learn, master, and leverage for success. Business owners who need to increase sales can use stories to do so. Nonprofit leaders who need to improve their fundraising can use stories to do so. And even professionals who need to land a new job can leverage the art of storytelling to meet their goals. So today I'm going to share with you the power of storytelling and a really simple process for storytelling that can help anyone be successful. When I was a child, my mom read Chitty Chitty Bang Bang to me so much that we both had it memorized. It was one of my favorite stories for a few reasons. Number one, I loved cars, and it was about a really cool car. There was a neighbor a few blocks away that had a whole garage full of antique cars. And so whenever I'd see Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, I'd think about the neighbor, and whatever I'd see my neighbor driving around in his 1920s, 30s, and 40s cars, I would call them the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang cars. So I loved cars, and it was about a really cool car. One of the reasons that I loved the story. Another reason that I love Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is because I was one of those kids who pushed limits, much to my mother's dismay. And this story was about a really cool car that pushed limits. It could fly. Who said cars had to stay on the ground? So I really love the idea that here's this whole story about defying rules and doing something completely different. And last but not least, I loved Chitty Chitty Bang Bang because I loved fixing things. I loved repurposing things. I loved taking old things and making them new again. And this story was about a really cool car that could fly that actually started out as a piece of junk in a junkyard. For me, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was about so much more than this magical car. I didn't know it at the time as a 4-year-old, but it represented and reflected parts of me and perspectives that I held that surely I couldn't articulate at the time. I couldn't really say the words, but I loved the story. I loved what it was communicating to the world. I loved what the Potts were able to do with this piece of junk and how they saw it as something special and how they didn't care what the rules are. They were like, no, we're going to try this. We're going to do this and we're going to be successful. Now, remember, I was 4, so these were my formative years. My identity was being shaped. I was learning to communicate. I was starting to form my own view of the world. And I believe that this story, among a few others that were some of my favorites, gave words to how I saw the world and what mattered to me as a little girl. This story resonated with me. It meant something to me, and I wanted to come back to it over and over and over and over again. In some ways, I'm sure that I wanted to have a car that could fly. I'm sure that I wanted my parents to take me to a junkyard and let's find a car and create one that could take off from the road, fly across the ocean, and take us into France. Today, I still love cars. I still think rules can and should be challenged. And I still like finding or creating treasure from trash. And I still like imagining what's possible that doesn't already exist. I want you to stop for a minute and think about your own childhood. Is there a story or a children's book that you really loved? And if so, why? What was it about that book, about that story that resonated with you? What parts of that story reflected in some way who you were or what you believed or what you hoped for? And I also want you to think about yourself today. What parts of that story have stuck with you over time? And why do you think that is? This, my friends, is the power of a good story. You see yourself in it. It touches you in some way. It lands with you. It compels you in one way or another to do something, to believe something. And most importantly, it stays with you. And we're going to talk today about how easily we can craft a story for any purpose, for any audience. While we do that, before we dig into the content, I want to offer 4 specific areas where stories can be incredibly beneficial so that you can contextualize the information I'm going to share with you tonight and think about it through the lens that makes the most sense for you and your work or the goals that you're trying to accomplish. Stories can be incredibly important and beneficial in business development. Stories can be incredibly important in personal branding or business branding. Stories can be hugely important in fundraising. And last but not least, stories can be incredibly important in career development. And this is not one that people think of a lot, but really think about your resume. All it is, it's your professional story. It's your career story. It's how you started. It's what you did along the way. It's where you are now. And to some degree, it's where you want to be in the future. Now, there are many other applications for effective storytelling, but these are the 4 areas where I've personally leaned into storytelling in my life. So I want to share my experience with you. And while you're listening, if you identify other areas where storytelling could be beneficial to you, please know that this process, this power of storytelling and the principles that I'm going to share with you are 100% transferable. And you can use these same strategies in other contexts. Now, before we dive into the content, I want you to think about an area that you'd like to work from, and you'll do your reflections in your practice using that scenario. So first, decide if you're working on storytelling for business development. Decide if you want to think about storytelling in terms of branding, fundraising, or career development. And then we'll get started. Now, as we go through the content, I am going to be pausing periodically for you to actually do some storytelling practice. You can use these pauses to just process and reflect if you don't want to actually write and practice. But if you do want to actually do some storytelling practice, you'll need something to write on and something to write with, or a computer or device to just type some notes. So here we go with the purpose of storytelling and the process of storytelling. And we're going to wrap up with the promise of storytelling in whatever context matters most to you. Let's start with the purpose. This should be really easy. The purpose of storytelling is, drum roll please, to tell a story. Storytelling uses words and imagery to create a new world or to take a listener to a new place, a place that you want them to go. And that's really, really important. You have to know where you want the reader or listener to go. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Are you trying to convince them to do something? Are you trying to get them to believe something? Do you want them to understand something? You have to know what it is that you want from your audience so that you can craft a story in a way that resonates with them and accomplishes your purpose. And that leads to another big question. Who's your audience? And what is it that you want from them? What do you want them to do, to know, to understand? I was a real firecracker, and that's putting it lightly. As a young child, I was opinionated, I was feisty, I was determined, I was full of personality, but I learned pretty early on how to use all of that to convince people to do what I wanted them to do. And for the most part, all it took was a little charisma. Sometimes I had to offer some rationale, and sometimes I had to offer some promise of how what I wanted would help them in one way or another. I learned pretty early in life how to appeal to different folks in a variety of different ways to get what I wanted from them. With my grandmother, I just had to be cute. With my teachers, I had to be charismatic and clever and smart. But with my mom, it was just the facts, ma'am, actual and factual. When I was in fourth grade, I remember wanting to go to a carnival at school. Now, my grandmother picked me up from school every day, and I stayed with her until my parents got off work. My mom was most often the one who picked me up at about 5:30 after she got off of her 5 o'clock job. Now, the carnival started at 5 o'clock, and it was at my school, which was about 2 minutes from my grandmother's house, walking distance. Make a left, go down to the corner, make a left, 2 blocks, make a right, and you're at school. But my school was about 20 minutes from our house on the other side of town. Now, my mom worked a senior level corporate job and used to tell us after work, I don't want to see y'all, hear y'all, or smell y'all for at least an hour. That was her way of letting us know that she needed some time alone to debrief, de-stress. So I knew asking her to take me to the carnival after being at work all day and then driving across town to pick me up after work and then driving back across town to get us home was not an option. I also knew that my grandmother didn't like being around a lot of kids, and the carnival would be full of kids because we had a K through 8 school, and so it was just going to be kids everywhere. So my job was to figure out how to convince not one, but both of them to let me go to the carnival. And convincing both of them was important because if I convinced my mom without my grandmother or my grandmother without my mom, I couldn't leverage the two of them, couldn't use them against each other or together to get the yeses that I need. And if I convinced one and not the other, it could have been seen as manipulation, and then I'd get in trouble for being manipulated. And we didn't want that. Nobody wanted that. So I decided that I would start with my grandmother. Now remember, my grandmother thought I was God's gift to the world. All I had to do was be cute. And she never wanted me to be disappointed for any reason. But that's not all my grandmother was. Yes, she was soft towards me, but she was also Fort Worth Police Department, worked for the Fort Worth Police Department. She was a police officer, and she lived in and worked one of the hardest parts of town. So yes, super soft with me, but also there was a no-nonsense side to her that I rarely encountered personally, but I knew it was there because I had seen it with other people. Now, if I could just get my grandmother to understand how important this carnival was to me and how devastated I'd be if I had to miss it, she might just forego her aversion to large crowds of children and take me to the carnival before my mom got there to pick me up. But here was the problem. My mom really didn't like to ask my grandmother to do anything extra. She was already picking me up from school every day, me and my little brother. She was already feeding us every day, and she was already tolerating my sassiness for 3 or 4 hours a day after she got off work. So it was an unwritten rule not to ask for anything extra during the time that I was with her every day. So now do you see the problem? I want to go to the carnival. Could probably ask my grandmother. Wasn't supposed to ask my grandmother, but my mom was probably going to say no. Well, I deduced that if I could get my grandmother to take me for the first 30 minutes and then convince my mom to come and just cover the last 30 minutes, I would have an entire hour of carnival bliss, and that was all I needed. I just didn't want to miss it. So what did I want? I wanted to go to the school carnival. And who did I want it from? I wanted it from my mom and my grandmother. And what mattered to both of them? To my grandmother, what mattered is that I was happy. And to my mom, what mattered was that she and nor my grandmother were inconvenienced. So I decided to go with what I later learned was a pathos appeal with my grandmother. And pathos is an appeal to the emotions. I really, really, really wanted to go. Granny, everybody's going to be there. And tomorrow they'll all be talking about the carnival and how much fun they had. Everyone except me. Insert really sad eyes. And I decided to go with the logos appeal with my mom. Mom, I know how much you don't like for us to ask Granny to do anything extra, but it's really not extra. It's just like 2 blocks away, and she can just sit in the carnival, in the cafeteria, and talk to other people while I play with my friends. She doesn't even have to be around the kids. And I'll be halfway done by the time you get there, and then we'll all be happy with very little to no inconvenience to anyone. I had pretty much convinced my grandmother, and then all I needed her to do was to convince my mom that it wasn't a problem and that I really needed to go, or else they would both have to deal with my incredible disappointment and the tears that would follow for days to come. So much to my surprise, it worked for both of them. I went to the carnival. I had a blast. Everything was fine. I still have pictures from that carnival. I said all of that to say that knowing your storytelling purpose is first and foremost, and this involves knowing what it is you're trying to accomplish and from whom and what matters to them. What are their values? What resonates with them? What would move them to action or would put them in a place of inaction? So let's stop for a minute and practice. I want you to consider one of the storytelling contexts that I shared earlier: business development, branding, fundraising, or maybe even career growth. And I want you to think of a scenario in which you'd be leveraging storytelling. So for business development, are you trying to land an account? Or maybe you want to get a new corporate sponsor. For branding, do you want to grow your followers on social media? For fundraising, do you want to sell tickets to an annual gala, or are you trying to get a grant from a large foundation? For career growth, are you hoping to get a promotion within your current company or land a new role with a new company? Take just a couple of minutes and come up with a context and then a purpose or a scenario, and name the audience that this storytelling would be for. If you're writing, go ahead and write that down. If you're just processing or reflecting, take a few minutes and think about it. So I'm going to model using career growth. That's the context. Landing a new role with a new company is the purpose or scenario. And the audience would be the hiring manager and or the department or division leader that manages the role. Now remember, effective storytelling considers all of those: the context, the purpose or scenario, and the audience. And to tell an effective story, you have to know who your audience is and what matters to them. One of the biggest mistakes that people make in storytelling is telling the story for themselves, not their audience. It's important, yes, for you to be part of this process, for your values, for the things that matter to you to be included in your story. But most importantly, is for you to consider who's listening and what it is that you want them to do. So biggest mistake is sometimes telling the story for themselves, not from the audience. And another big mistake that people make is telling the story for too broad or too general an audience and not a target audience. Now, this doesn't mean that the story can't be heard by everyone. It just means it wasn't written with everyone in mind. The best, most effective storytellers know what they want, who they want it from, and exactly what these people value. So now I want to pause one more time so you can add a value statement, so you can think about what it is that your target audience values, what's important to them. And from there, we'll be able to craft a clear and compelling story that resonates with your target audience. You know what you want. You know who you want it from. Now add what matters to them. In my earlier example, I used career development as the context. I used landing a role at a new company as my purpose for storytelling. Now, remember I said in the introduction, we don't often think of storytelling as part of a professional journey or a career journey, but part of getting a new job is being able to concisely and clearly articulate your professional story. What have you done? Where have you been? Where have you done it? What value did you add? What were the strategies that you used to be successful? And how can you bring those experiences, that expertise, to a new company for their benefit? So understanding who that company is and what their values are, how they work, is really important in that professional storytelling. If you are a nonprofit leader and your purpose is to sell tickets to a fundraising gala, get sponsors for a large fundraising event, it's important to know that this is what I want, and here are the people that I want it from. And I'm going to be very clear about understanding what those people value and making sure that what I'm asking aligns to their values. What I'm promoting aligns to their values. So number one is the purpose for storytelling. It's to use words and imagery to take someone to a place that you want them to go. That's either to get them to believe something, to understand something, to feel something, and in most cases, to actually do something. And in effective storytelling, you're clearly articulating what those things are, and you're doing it in a way that is aligned to who your target audience is. So now let's get to the process of storytelling. This gets to that process of or to telling the story in a way that resonates with your listener. This is usually the hardest part for people because there's an art and there's a science to effective storytelling. And for most people, one of those comes easier than the other. For some, they are better at the art of storytelling, and for others, they're better at the science of storytelling, but both are equally important. And where one comes easier, you may have to practice the skill for the other, build that skill up so that you can perform equally well in both the art and the science. The science of storytelling simply involves having all the right components. And the art of storytelling is about knowing how to lean in and out of those components in just the right way, at just the right time, with just the right depth. So I want you to think about a story. Probably in 5th grade, 4th grade maybe, you learned how to write a personal narrative, how to write a personal story. You probably learned in elementary school that a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a plot, it has characters, it has a climax, and it has a closing. And that's still true. We're not going to complicate storytelling too much. We're going to stick to those simple basics. A beginning, a middle, and end, a purpose, characters, and a logical flow. So great storytelling, from the science of storytelling perspective, includes a narrative. It's the story. It's what's happening. Also includes details that bring that narrative to life. And last but not least, great storytelling includes opportunities for your audience to engage, interact, or act. And that's whether it's a written story that someone is reading passively or on their own, a quiet read, or if you're telling your story verbally and in person. Either way, there has to be a story. There have to be strong details that bring that narrative to life and opportunities for the audience to engage, interact, or act. So that's the science of storytelling in a nutshell. Now let's get to the art of storytelling, because I believe that this is where the magic happens. Even if you don't have a great story, you can have great delivery of a story. You want someone to listen to it. That means you've got to grab their attention. You've got to hook them first and listen. You don't have a lot of time to do it. For the average person, you've got less than a minute to grab their attention. You do that with a hook. This hook is probably the most important part of your story. And it can be a strong, bold statement. It can be a thought-provoking question. It can be a compelling piece of data, or even a joke. If you are charismatic enough, it can simply be an introduction of yourself to your audience. But remember your purpose and let your purpose drive the development of your hook. What do you want? Who do you want it from? And what will matter to them? So if you want to convince a high-profile celebrity to follow your nonprofit's Instagram, a strong statement, true or not, about how celebrities don't use their influence for good is probably not the best move, because that's going to turn your target audience off. Instead, you might want to start with an example or two of how well-known, well-respected celebrities have used their influence and their status to help society and move a cause forward, and how we need more of this in the world today, and how you can be the next celebrity, you can be the next person to really impact cause A, B, or C. You still with me? Science is the narrative. It's the story itself about your organization, about your cause, about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. But art is telling it in a way that captures your audience's attention. And we start that with a strong, compelling hook. Next in the art of storytelling is the details. It's these details where we're going to bring the reader in. We're going to appeal to their emotion, to their logic, to their authority even. We're going to create a story in their mind, a story that they become part of, a story that resonates with them in a way that they can barely disconnect themselves from it. When we give details in our storytelling, we want to be as colorful as possible. This is where we go back to what we learned in 4th grade or 5th grade about imagery, about figurative language, about using lots of adjectives to describe. We want to use words that take the listener, the audience, and places them right in the middle of your narrative. Remember, we said earlier that it's important that in your purpose you consider what resonates with your target audience. So if you are using storytelling for the purpose of fundraising, your target audience is probably going to be a foundation or a philanthropic, some other members of the philanthropic community. And the philanthropic community, whether it's an individual donor or a large foundation, they're all about impact. They're all about outcomes. They're all about community. They're all about changing the narrative, changing someone's story through some cause, whatever their cause is. And so storytelling for the philanthropic community, details need to include stories about people, how someone's life has been changed by your work, how many people in your community or in society are in need of a certain service that you offer, and how much your work could be scaled, how many more people you could serve if you were able to increase your long-term giving or to diversify your donor base, and how their gift can change people. You want to add visuals, pictures of the recipients of their gifts, pictures of your organization or your team actually providing this much needed service. And you also want to be really clear about what happens when your services are not able to be shared in your community. Yes, stories are about people and the impact that you make on people, but they're also about what happens, particularly in the context of fundraising. They're also about the risk of not taking action. What's at risk if we don't move? So the art of storytelling is making sure that you're bringing into your story the components that bring it alive and that also really, really, really firmly resonate with the people that you're trying to impact. Another major component in the art of storytelling is presentation. We often think of presentation as giving an on-stage or in-person talk. But that's not all it is. Sometimes presentation is how you arrange the story for a written receipt. Are you writing a book? Is it a slide deck? Is it a pitch deck? Is it a blog? Is it an article or it doesn't matter, but presentation matters. And by presentation, I don't just mean the visual presentation, I also mean how the story is arranged. So remember we talked earlier, first, next, then last. Hook, details, impact, call to action. These matter a lot in non-verbal or non-in-person stories, like in impact reports or in any type of written collateral or physical collateral. Those details really matter. And you also want to be sure that you include lots of visuals that bring the reader or the audience into the story. That's when you're not giving a face-to-face, in-person, or audible story. But when you are, you cannot miss that moment and that opportunity. The greatest stories can fall flat with a boring presentation or a boring presenter. So you have to ask yourself the question, how will you connect with your audience? However that is, whether that's on a piece of paper or whether that's on a stage, so that they connect with your story. And if ever there was a time for you to come alive, it's when you have the attention of the people that you want to know something, believe something, or do something. We started with that strong hook. We've got great details. We have a call to action. But how are we arranging all of that in a way that the listener listens or the reader keeps reading? In a written presentation, you want to use a fine balance of quotes or dialogue or conversation, and then facts, statements, and declarations. You want to use a fine balance. You want to alternate between what's real, what's reality, and what's imagined, what could be. You want to use a really fine balance of sentences that tell facts, they give details, and also questions that pause and give the reader or the listener an opportunity to reflect, or to think. And the same is true if you're giving an in-person presentation. If your storytelling is in real time. In addition to those things, you want to use your full self, your whole self, your full body to engage your audience and to keep them with you throughout your storytelling purpose. You want to smile. You want to look around the room. You want to find somebody. You want to make eye contact with them. You want to speak to them for just a few minutes. You want to stop. You want to ask questions to give them a chance to think, to reflect, maybe even to answer. Remember, they want to engage, interact, and act as part of your storytelling process. You want to lean in. You want to get close and proximate to people that you're speaking to so they feel like they're part of the conversation. The best presentations, the best storytelling results in the person who's listening feeling like you're talking to no one else in the room but them. Great stories have a balance of entertainment and education. They're relatable and relevant to the audience. They're logically sequenced and they're organized. First this, then this, next this, and last this. They're memorable and unforgettable. And they have a clear and compelling appeal to the audience. They know exactly what it is you want from them, why it matters, and how they can contribute to your cause. I said earlier that we were going to pause and do some reflection and some practice. So I want to stop here. And I want you to take a few minutes. And I want you to take that context, that purpose or scenario, and that audience that you talked about earlier. And I want you to think about what would you say to them? What's a story that you would share with them to accomplish these things that we just talked about? That bring them in, that give them a sense of connection to your cause. What is your ask of them? And what can you say to them for that to become really alive for them? So take a minute and think about what it is that you want, who you want it from, what's important to them, and what you want them to know about you, your business, your organization, and how will you convey that in a way that engages them and makes them feel like they can make a contribution to what it is you're trying to accomplish. I'm going to give you just a few minutes to think about that. I'd love for you to write that down. And then we'll come back and close up on some key reminders about storytelling and some next steps that you can take in your business, in your organization, or on your professional journey. So back to the storytelling process. It's an art and it's a science. It requires creativity. It requires knowledge of your audience. It requires vision and it requires some skill. It also requires practice. You have a lot of information that you've got to convey in a very short story, in a very short period of time. You have to know where to begin and where to go after that. We've already talked about knowing your purpose and knowing your audience. The next thing that you want to be really careful to do is to clearly articulate your message. What is it that you're selling? What is it that you're raising money for? What service are you providing? What issue are you advocating for? What's the whole point of this? And why does it matter? You should be able to do this in 1 to 2 sentences. In addition to your message, you've got to decide what kind of story you're telling. You've got to decide, are you telling a story to get someone to do something, to provoke some action? Are you telling a story to get somebody to believe something or to grow in some area of knowledge? Are you telling a story to bring people together, to foster connection? Each type of story that you're going to tell, which depends 100% on your purpose that we spoke about earlier, has a different process. Now, I'm not saying that the entire story making process is different, but remember we talked earlier about details and the language that you use and the imagery that you create. All of that is determined by the type of story that you're telling. If you want to promote action, you're not going to do lots of exaggeration in your story. You're really going to be talking about how, actionable ways to take action, actionable ways to move. You're going to be talking about the importance of change. You're going to be telling personal stories about how you changed a particular mindset or action. If your goal is to foster connection, then you're going to be talking about people. You're going to be talking about ideas. You're going to be talking about what it means when people come together and collaborate. You're going to include lots of conversation in your storytelling. If your goal is to increase knowledge or to educate, you're going to use stories that include lots of facts. You're going to include stories that include stories that talk about problem solving or historical context. You're going to avoid lots of me language or personal language, but you're going to talk more about impact. And then last but not least, yes, we want to know the purpose, know the audience. You're going to decide on your key message. What is it that matters? What are you selling, doing? What are you raising money for? What service are you providing? What issue are you advocating for? What's the whole point of this story? Then you're going to tell the story according to what it is you're hoping to accomplish. Last but not least, you're going to end with a clear call to action. Now, what do you want someone to do? They've listened to this incredible story. You've drawn them all the way in. I shared 2 key mistakes that people make in storytelling. The last one is not having a call to action. You've pulled people in. You have appealed to their emotion. You have appealed to their logic. You've put them in the middle of the story. And then you just leave them. You just walk away. And they just go home with nothing. No, what exactly is it that you want them to do after they hear you, after they read? Do you want them to donate money? Do you want them to subscribe to your newsletter? Do you want them to meet you at the next event, join you on a march? Do you want them to buy a product? Do you want them to buy tickets to the gala? What is it that you want them to do? You've already identified that in the beginning in your purpose before you even started the storytelling. Now you've got to tell them what that is. Save this until the end, but don't forget it at the end. And then last but not least, we talked a little bit about, I just said last but not least. Here's another last but not least. This is not necessarily about the story itself, but it's about the presentation. We just went a few minutes about whether or not sometimes you're giving a verbal presentation, sometimes you're on a stage, sometimes it's a written story. But regardless of your storytelling medium, regardless of, you've got to have the right medium, and you've got to make sure that your storytelling is appropriate and effective, whether it's written or whether it's spoken, whether it's on a podcast or whether it's on your website. So plan and structure your story in a way that fits with whatever medium you're using. I hope that the time we've spent today, what I've shared with you, number one, I hope it inspires you to activate storytelling and leverage storytelling as a tool that you can use in your work. Number two, I hope that I've given you some information that helps you to tell your story in a very clear and compelling way. And then last but not least, I hope that you understand that there is an art and a science to storytelling, and that wherever your strength is, lean into that. But wherever you're not so strong, practice that. If you're great at the art of storytelling, practice the science. Make sure you write those details in. Make sure you practice developing a strong hook. And if you're really strong at the at the science of storytelling, make sure that you lean into the art. Remember, when you're speaking, smile more, pause, look at your audience, pull them in, ask them questions. And if you're writing, if it's a written story, then make sure that you are using just the right balance of dialogue and quotes and conversation, as much as you're using facts, details, and figures. And always, always, always end with a call to action. You've spent all this time creating this beautiful story, tailored just for your audience. Now tell them what you want, and do it in such a way that they can't help but saying yes. After you've done all that, it's time for you to share your story. Get on a stage, send an email, put it on social media, write a blog, record a video. But get your story out there so that you can get the results that you need to accomplish the goal that you've set in front of you. Again, my name is Dr. Sharla Horton-Williams. I hope that tonight that this content has been helpful for you. I hope it's been inspiring. I hope it's been motivating. I hope you're ready to tell a great story. And if there's any way that I can support you in your storytelling efforts, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me on social media at liftedbysharla.net, I believe. And I'm also on www.liftedbysharla.net is my website. I'm also on Facebook and on Instagram at Lifted by Sharla. So please stay in touch with me. I would love for you to send your stories to me so that I can cheer you on and help you become an amazing storyteller that gets great stuff done in the world. Thank you.